White bank manager calls cops on black kid. Speechless when her mom, the CEO, arrives. This 13-year-old boy just wanted to open a bank account with his savings. But the manager looked at him and saw a thief. The story begins with Leo Sterling, an eager young boy, walking into a bank with an innocent faith in the world. But instead of a welcome, he was met with suspicion, bitter accusations, and ultimately, the cold steel of police handcuffs, all because of one manager's blind prejudice. But she had made a fatal mistake. She didn't know that the boy's mother, Dr. Isabella Montoya Sterling, was not just another worried parent. She was the secret owner of a financial empire, the owner of the very bank where her son was being humiliated. And she was on her way. This is not just a story about an injustice. This is a story about the collision of deep-seated prejudice and an unimaginable power. Follow along to see what a mother will do to protect her son and change an entire system. On a clear Tuesday afternoon, 13-year-old Leo Sterling sat on the number 14 bus, his heart thumping in time with the jolts of the vehicle. He could feel the promising weight of the backpack on his lap. Inside, in a thick paper envelope, was a small fortune. $750 in birthday money from his grandmother, and $1,500 in savings he had carefully accumulated from his allowance and small rewards for excellent grades. Today was no ordinary day. Today was the day he would prove to his mother that he was old enough, responsible enough, to manage his own financial world. For weeks, Leo had planned for this moment. He had spent hours researching different types of accounts online, rehearsing what he would say to the bank teller, and even practicing his confident walk through the large glass doors. This wasn't just about opening a bank account. It was a rite of passage. It was independence, responsibility, and the first real step into the world of adults. Leo Sterling lived in a world that most kids his age could only dream of. The difference was, he had no idea. His mother, Dr. Isabella Montoya Sterling, had deliberately raised him to believe they were simply comfortable. Leo took the city bus to the prestigious Northwood Preparatory Academy instead of being chauffeured in luxury cars. He bought his clothes at regular department stores in the mall, not flashy designer boutiques. This carefully constructed life of normalcy was not an accident. It was a conscious decision, a protective shield. At the same time, dozens of miles away from Leo's noisy bus ride, Dr. Isabella Montoya Sterling sat at the head of a massive mahogany conference table on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Capital Management Building. Surrounding her were 5 powerful executives, men and women who controlled billions of dollars. Her voice was calm and cool as she gave directives on a 9-figure acquisition, a conversation that could shift the regional financial landscape. In the business world, she was known as Isabella Sterling, the brilliant CEO who had taken over and grown Sterling Capital Management into a powerhouse. But that was only a fraction of the truth. The real name of the empire she had inherited was the Montoya Group, a massive financial conglomerate with a long history and unparalleled power. She had learned from her own childhood that extreme wealth could be both a blessing and a curse. She remembered being constantly watched, judged, surrounded by sycophants drawn to the Montoya name. People looked at her, but never truly saw her. They only saw money and power. So, when Leo was born, Isabella made a decision that would shape her son's entire worldview. She would give him the one gift she never had: normalcy. She wanted her son to be judged by his character, his intelligence, and his kindness, not by his family's bank balance. He had to learn the value of hard work and humility before he learned of the immense responsibility that would one day be his. Leo knew none of this. To him, his mother was a busy woman who always had time to check his homework. the one who taught him how to ride a bike, the one who was always in the front row at his school basketball games. As the bus stopped in downtown Denver, Leo stepped off, his heart full of naive excitement. He walked toward the marble and glass building of Meridian Trust Bank. To his eyes, it looked grand and solid, a symbol of stability and trust, a gateway to the adult world he so eagerly wished to join. He took a deep breath, adjusted the backpack on his shoulder, and pushed open the heavy glass door. He was walking into a bank, but in reality, he was walking into his first harsh lesson about a world his mother had spent 13 years trying to shield him from. As Leo stepped into the main lobby of Meridian Trust Bank, his excitement was like a small flame in a cold, cavernous room. He smiled at an employee walking by, but received only a hurried nod, the person's eyes seeming to look right through him. He saw a white couple being greeted by another employee with a radiant smile. The air around them was warm and friendly. But as the staff's eyes swept over Leo, a young black boy in a school uniform, the atmosphere seemed to thicken. Leo didn't understand why, but he felt the shift. Maybe it's because I'm so young, he thought. He took a breath, told himself to be confident, and walked to the least crowded teller window, where a small plaque read, "Heather Price." Heather looked up from her computer screen, and the professional smile forming on her lips suddenly froze when she saw Leo. It didn't disappear entirely, but it retracted into something mechanically polite, devoid of any warmth. "Can I help you?" Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Hi," Leo said, trying to maintain his cheerful demeanor. "I'd like to open my first bank account." He proudly placed his envelope on the counter. Heather glanced at the thick envelope, then back at Leo, with an almost imperceptible raise of her eyebrow. "How much?" she asked curtly. $2,250, Leo said, unable to hide the pride in his voice. He had counted it himself a dozen times. Heather's response was a long pause. She didn't say, "Oh, that's wonderful," or "Congratulations." She just stared at the boy, then at the envelope, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. The silence began to chip away at Leo's confidence. "I have all my papers here," he added, quickly opening his backpack. "My birth certificate, my student ID." "Just a moment," Heather interrupted, holding up a hand. "For this amount, you'll need to wait here. I need to get my manager." Her tone wasn't that of someone following procedure, but of someone offloading a problem. Leo nodded, a little disappointed but still trying to be cooperative. He stepped to the side as Heather picked up the phone. He could overhear snippets of her conversation, and each word was like a small stone thrown at the balloon of his excitement. "Carolyn, it's Heather at window 2. Listen, I've got one of those situations here." A pause. Leo didn't understand what one of those situations meant. "A kid, maybe 13. Yeah, one of those kids. Trying to deposit a large stack of cash. It looks incredibly suspicious." The excitement in Leo's chest began to cool, replaced by a feeling of confusion and unease. Suspicious? What had he done that was suspicious? "No, I haven't even bothered looking at his papers. It just feels wrong. You know what I mean. You should probably come handle this." Heather hung up without looking at Leo again. She just jerked her head toward the waiting area. "Go sit over there." Leo's initial excitement was now completely gone. He walked silently to the waiting chairs, the backpack on his shoulders suddenly feeling heavy. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He sat down, staring at his shoes, waiting for the manager, hoping she would be a reasonable adult who could clear up this misunderstanding. But Leo didn't know that the manager he was waiting for had already been primed to expect a problem, and in her mind, the image of that problem was already fully formed. Leo sat on the hard chair, each passing second feeling like an eternity. His initial excitement had completely vanished, replaced by a tangled mess of confusion and a growing sense of unease. He couldn't understand what he had done wrong. He just wanted to do something very adult, very responsible. Why was it suspicious? A few minutes later, a woman emerged from the back offices. She was tall and slender, in a starkly tailored gray suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful. Her face was etched with an expression of weary impatience, as if Leo's presence was the final interruption in an already terrible day. This was Carolyn Vance. With 22 years in the industry, she believed she had an innate ability to read people, to distinguish truth from lies with a single glance. And when her eyes landed on Leo, a young black boy huddled in his chair, she had already made her judgment before she even spoke. Heather's report had painted a picture, and Carolyn's prejudice had colored it in. "Son, what seems to be the problem here?" Carolyn asked, her voice devoid of any goodwill. It wasn't a question meant to understand, but an accusation. Leo quickly stood up, nearly dropping his backpack. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Leo Sterling. I just wanted to open a savings account." He tried to summon his confidence again. He thought this adult, a manager, would be more reasonable. He opened his backpack and carefully took out his documents, the thing he was most proud of. "I even have my student ID from Northwood Preparatory Academy right here." He held out the card, hoping the name of one of the city's most prestigious schools would dispel any doubt. Carolyn glanced at the card, then back at Leo's uniform. A cold smirk flickered across her lips. In her mind, a venomous thought formed. A kid like this at Northwood? It must be stolen. The uniform, the ID card, it was all just a more elaborate ruse. She waved a dismissive hand, brushing the student ID aside as if it were trash. "That doesn't prove anything," she said. "The issue is this money." She pointed to the envelope on Heather's counter. "Where does a boy like you get that much cash?" "It's my birthday money from my grandmother and my savings," Leo tried to explain, his voice starting to tremble. "A likely story," Carolyn scoffed. "What kind of grandmother gives a 13-year-old that much cash? Do you think I'm a fool?" She stepped closer, leaning down slightly to look directly into Leo's eyes, a look of judgment and power. "I've been in this business for 22 years, son. I know a suspicious transaction when I see one, and I know all about boys like you." That phrase, "boys like you," hit Leo like a physical slap. He froze. He'd heard that phrase on the news, in movies, but he never imagined it would be aimed directly at him. His confusion now began to morph into real fear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This woman wasn't trying to help him. This woman hated him. And he didn't even know why. The phrase "boys like you" hung in the air, venomous and heavy. For the first time in his life, Leo Sterling understood what it felt like to be judged not for what he did, but for who he was. The invisible wall his mother had painstakingly built for 13 years shattered into a million pieces. The boy's initial confusion gave way to a cold, chilling fear, the primal fear of a child being cornered by a powerful adult. Hot tears began to well up, streaming down his cheeks. They weren't tears of weakness, but of profound helplessness and hurt. He sobbed, trying to speak through his cries. I don't understand. I just wanted to open an account." Carolyn Vance saw Leo's tears, but there was no compassion in her eyes. On the contrary, she saw it as confirmation of her prejudice. "Ah, there it is. The waterworks. They always use this trick when they're caught." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper, quiet enough for distant customers not to hear, but loud enough to pierce Leo's panicked heart. "Did your mother send you in here to launder dirty money?" she hissed. "I've seen this before. Use a kid to make the transaction, thinking no one will suspect." That vicious accusation targeted not just Leo, but also his mother, the woman he loved and respected more than anyone in the world. The shock was worse than 1,000 insults. "No!" Leo cried out in desperation. "My mom's not like that. Please, please, just let me call her." One phone call. "Please!" But Carolyn was too far gone to turn back. She had decided on the narrative in her head, and she would see it through to the end. With a cold, satisfied smile on her lips, she turned, decisively picking up the phone on her desk. "I'm calling the police," she announced, loudly enough for those nearby to hear, a move to assert her absolute authority. "We'll see what they have to say about this money. I will not be manipulated by crocodile tears." As Carolyn began to dial 911, a jolt of pure panic shot through Leo. He knew he was in deep trouble. The police, they wouldn't believe him. They would believe this woman. In that instant, survival instinct took over. With trembling hands, he quietly pulled his phone from his pocket. Tears blurred the screen, but he managed to type as fast as he could. Each character was a cry for help. "Mom, I'm at Meridian Trust Bank. The manager called the police. She says I stole the money and won't let me call you. I'm scared." He hit send just as Carolyn finished her call and turned back to him. She saw the phone in Leo's hand. "Give me that phone," Carolyn yelled, lunging forward to snatch it. But it was too late. The message was sent. The signal was already traveling across the Denver skyline, heading straight for a 42nd floor boardroom, where Leo's mother was in what she thought was just another routine meeting. She had no idea that the world she had so carefully controlled was about to be shaken to its very foundations. In the 42nd floor boardroom of Sterling Capital Management, the air was thick with power and immense numbers. Dr. Isabella Montoya Sterling sat at the head of the gleaming mahogany table, surrounded by 5 senior executives. They were deep in the details of an acquisition, a discussion that involved moving hundreds of millions of dollars as casually as if they were discussing the weather. Isabella, in her custom-tailored suit, exuded a cool composure. She was in her element, a queen on a financial chessboard. And then her personal phone, placed face down on the table, vibrated once. A single, gentle buzz, almost imperceptible. But it was a special signal. She had set an emergency alert for only one person. Leo. A signal that would cut through any meeting, any silent mode. A mother's precaution she never thought she'd have to use. She glanced at her colleagues, signaling a pause with a subtle hand gesture, and picked up the phone. The most powerful eyes in the city watched as the calmest woman they knew underwent a terrifying transformation. First, a frown of confusion crossed her face as she read the words. Meridian Trust Bank? Police? Scared? Those words did not belong in her son's world. Then, as the meaning of the message sank in, confusion turned to shock. Her eyes widened, disbelief plain on her face. And finally, the shock hardened, solidifying into something far more dangerous, an ice-cold fury. The temperature in the boardroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. Isabella's face became a mask of tightly controlled rage, a stillness more frightening than any scream. The people around her instinctively leaned back in their chairs. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella said, her voice so quiet it was chilling. "This meeting is over." She stood up so abruptly her chair rolled back and hit the wall. "Someone has just made a very expensive mistake." "Ma'am, is something wrong?" a vice president asked, his voice filled with concern. Isabella was already striding toward the door, phone in one hand, car keys already in the other. She didn't answer him. She was dialing. The first call was to Marcus Thorne, one of the most feared lawyers in the state. "Marcus," she commanded, "I need you at the downtown branch of Meridian Trust Bank. Now my son is there. They've called the police on him." She hung up before he could reply. The second call was to Victor Gallo, her head of security, a former police captain who had protected the Montoya family for 15 years. "Victor, get the car. Destination, Meridian Trust, downtown. And get me Arthur Kensington on the line. I need to speak with him." Arthur Kensington, the chairman of the board of Meridian Trust Bank itself. Isabella wasn't calling a branch manager. She was calling the head of the entire institution. As she stepped into her private elevator, her heels clicked on the marble floor like gunshots. Across the city, Leo was living a child's worst nightmare. He had no idea that an unstoppable force, a storm named a mother's love, was hurtling toward him. 2 police officers walked into Meridian Trust Bank with a predetermined attitude. They weren't there to investigate. They were there to handle a problem Carolyn Vance had described over the phone. An older, seasoned officer named Miller approached the counter, while his partner, a younger female officer named Davis, stood watch nearby. "We got a call about a kid causing a disturbance," Officer Miller said, his voice weary and uninterested. "That's him," Carolyn said with unconcealed satisfaction, pointing at Leo. "Trying to deposit suspicious funds, has no reasonable explanation." Leo tried to speak through his sobs. "Officers, I can explain. It's my money. I have all my papers." But Officer Miller didn't even glance at him. "We hear stories like this all day, kid," he said dismissively. "Theft, petty dealing. Everyone has a story about their legit money." Leo felt the world crumble beneath him. These adults, the ones in uniforms that were supposed to represent fairness, were exactly like Carolyn. They looked at him and saw a criminal. "Please," Leo begged, "just look at my ID. I go to Northwood Prep. My mom has an account here." "That's enough," Officer Davis cut in, moving closer and pulling a pair of handcuffs from her belt. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." Leo froze. "Why?" "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're being detained on suspicion of theft and fraud," Miller explained mechanically. "You can tell your story down at the station." Click. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around Leo's small wrists. The dry sound echoed through the bank lobby, drowning out the soft background music. Other customers stopped, staring in horror. A few phones were raised to record. An elderly woman shook her head and muttered, "This is so wrong." But no one intervened. No one asked the officers to slow down, to investigate before arresting a 13-year-old child. As the officers began to lead Leo across the bank lobby, tears of humiliation streamed down his face. He felt like an animal on display. He had never felt so small and alone. Just as they reached the large glass doors, a sleek black car glided to a stop at the curb. It wasn't just any car. It was a Bentley, its black paint so polished it was like a mirror, its windows as dark as night. It arrived silently but commanded all attention, like a black panther stepping into a field of gazelles. The back door opened. Dr. Isabella Montoya Sterling stepped out. She wore a perfectly tailored suit that fit like a suit of armor. She was not rushed, not panicked. Every step she took radiated absolute authority. Following her was her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, with his sharp glasses and colder expression, and her security chief, Victor Gallo, a large man with the eyes of a hawk. The atmosphere outside the bank seemed to freeze. The 2 officers holding Leo stopped, sensing the wave of power directed at them. Officer Miller squinted, trying to assess the situation. Carolyn Vance, watching from inside, frowned in confusion. Isabella didn't look at anyone else. Her eyes were focused on one thing only: her 13-year-old son, standing there, small and terrified, with his hands cuffed behind his back. A deadly silence fell over the space in front of the bank. The confrontation was about to begin. Isabella Sterling's heels struck the marble floor in a steady, cold rhythm, like a countdown to Judgment Day. She walked past the 2 officers holding her son without a single glance in their direction. She wasn't here to plead with the enforcers. She was here to cut off the head of the snake. Her gaze locked onto a single target, the woman behind the counter, the woman with the smug look who had caused all of this. Isabella stopped directly in front of Carolyn Vance. The entire bank lobby seemed to hold its breath. "Let my son go," Isabella said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the air feel thick. Carolyn looked at the wealthy, well-dressed woman before her, and her inherent arrogance resurfaced. She didn't recognize Isabella, who rarely appeared at common social events. In Carolyn's eyes, this was just another rich mother trying to use money to interfere with justice. She let out a condescending smirk. "Ma'am, I don't know who you think you are, but that boy is a theft suspect. The police are handling it. It's official business." Isabella's expression didn't change. She simply reached into her handbag, a bag whose price could pay Carolyn's salary for a year. But she didn't pull out a wad of cash. She pulled out a single business card. It was made of the thickest cardstock, with exquisite gold-embossed lettering. She placed it on the marble countertop with a soft but definitive tap, as if placing a chess piece for checkmate. "I am Dr. Isabella Montoya Sterling," she said with lethal calm. Carolyn picked up the card to read it, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. The name Montoya. Anyone in the banking industry had heard that legendary name, but surely it couldn't be. "I don't understand," Carolyn stammered. "The boy's name is Sterling, not Montoya." Isabella's smile was colder than a winter wind. "Montoya is my family name. Sterling is my husband's name. And you," Isabella enunciated every word, "have just arrested the grandson of the man who founded this very bank." Then she delivered the final blow. "The Montoya Group owns a 55% stake in Meridian Trust Bank. We don't just bank here, Carolyn. We own this place." The blood drained from Carolyn Vance's face. The business card fell from her trembling fingers, landing silently on the counter. Her entire world, the world built on 22 years of experience, on the petty power of a manager, on ugly prejudice, crumbled into dust in that single moment. The woman whose son she had just called a thief was the owner of her career, her future, her very livelihood. At that exact moment, the bank's main doors swung open once more. The main doors of the bank swung open again. This time, the man who entered was older, in an expensive suit, but he was nearly running, his face flushed and his breathing heavy. It was Arthur Kensington, the chairman of the board of Meridian Trust Bank. He didn't notice the crowd, the staff, or even the police. His eyes searched for only one person. "Isabella," he called out, his voice full of apology and alarm. "I came as soon as I got your message. Where's Leo? Is he all right?" The sight of the bank's most powerful executive running in and addressing this woman by her first name with unconcealed reverence sent a shockwave through the crowd. For the bank employees, it was the confirmation of a nightmare. For Carolyn Vance, it was the final nail in her career's coffin. "Arthur," Isabella replied, her voice softening slightly for the longtime family friend. "Your employee here," she nodded toward Carolyn, "accused my 13-year-old son of theft. She refused to verify his identity and called the police to have him arrested." Arthur Kensington turned to look at Carolyn, his expression shifting from alarm to utter horror. "You did what?" Sir," Carolyn tried to defend herself, but her voice was a weak whisper. I was just following procedure for suspicious activity." "Procedure?" Isabella interjected, her voice rising for the first time, sharp and cutting. "The boy told you it was birthday money. He showed you his ID, his school records, his account statements from this very bank. What more of an explanation did you need?" Arthur didn't need to hear more. He signaled to the bank's security team, "Bring me the surveillance footage, immediately." A few minutes later, everyone, all the witnesses, was holding their breath, watching a monitor brought out from the security room. The tape did not lie. It showed Leo entering politely, smiling, and presenting his documents. It showed Carolyn immediately becoming hostile, ignoring the documents, and treating the boy with clear contempt. But that wasn't all. At Arthur's request, the security team pulled up older footage involving Carolyn. A clear pattern of discrimination emerged, case after case. Her demanding unreasonable extra documentation from a black man, her showing clear annoyance with a Hispanic woman, her consistent air of suspicion toward customers of color. "My God," Arthur whispered, as he watched the evidence of systemic discrimination play out on the screen. Carolyn stood there, staring at the monitor in horror, watching her 22-year career turn to ash in real time. Every racist assumption, every flawed decision, every moment of arrogance was recorded, exposed for all to see. Isabella turned to Arthur, her eyes as cold as steel. "Arthur, I want to know how many other customers have been treated like this. I want a full investigation into this woman's conduct, and I want it to start immediately." Arthur nodded decisively. "It will be done, Isabella. I don't know how to apologize enough. This is completely inexcusable." As Arthur signaled his security team, Isabella turned back to Carolyn, who was now trembling behind the counter. "Do you know the most tragic part of this, Carolyn?" Isabella said quietly. "My son had never experienced racism before today. He lived a sheltered life, protected from people like you." Carolyn tried to say something, but no words would come out. "Today, you stole his innocence," Isabella continued. "You taught a 13-year-old boy that there are people who will hate him just for the color of his skin, no matter how educated he is, how polite he is, or how legitimate his business is. That is a lesson he will never forget." Arthur Kensington stepped forward. "Ms. Vance," he said formally, "your employment with Meridian Trust Bank is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and you are permanently banned from all bank properties." As Carolyn was led away in disgrace, Isabella turned and addressed the crowd of customers and employees who had witnessed the entire event. "Let this be a lesson to everyone," her voice carried to every corner of the bank. "Racism isn't just morally wrong. It's bad for business. It's expensive. And in this case, it just cost someone their entire career." The story wasn't over. Isabella still had to get to her son, who was likely sitting in a juvenile detention center, scared and confused. The storm had swept through the bank, but its consequences were only just beginning to spread. Carolyn Vance's downfall was swift and brutal. Within 30 minutes of Chairman Kensington's announcement, security had cleared out her office. 22 years of a career, personal effects, family photos, awards, and certificates of achievement were unceremoniously dumped into cardboard boxes. Her access card was deactivated, her computer passwords were changed, and her name was scrubbed from the employee directory. But that humiliation was just the beginning. As word spread internally through the bank, employees who had worked with Carolyn for years began to recall incidents they had previously ignored. The way she would often make off-color jokes about certain clients, how she always seemed to demand extra paperwork from people of color, a subtle but consistent pattern of discrimination that everyone had noticed, but no one had been brave enough to report. Within 2 hours, Carolyn's professional reputation was in ruins. The banking industry is small, and news travels fast through professional networks. By the end of that week, financial institutions across the state knew exactly what Carolyn Vance had done to Leo Sterling. Her name became a cautionary tale, whispered in conferences and professional development seminars, synonymous with everything wrong with institutional racism in finance. But Carolyn's punishment was only the beginning of systemic change. The 2 police officers who arrested Leo without investigation, Miller and Davis, suddenly found themselves under the most intense scrutiny of their careers. Their body camera footage was reviewed frame by frame, revealing a pattern of assumption and bias that their superiors could no longer ignore. A full internal affairs investigation was launched. They didn't just look at this incident, but re-examined every arrest involving minority suspects made by the two officers over the past 5 years. The data painted an alarming picture. Officer Miller had an arrest rate for black suspects nearly 3 times higher than his white colleagues, despite working in the same precincts. Both officers were suspended, and the police department, under pressure from the public and the power of the Montoya family, was forced to implement sweeping reforms. Meanwhile, Chairman Arthur Kensington was working 18-hour days to repair the damage to Meridian Trust Bank's reputation. He knew that the trust of the Montoya family depended on his ability to prove this was an isolated incident, not representative of the institution's values. The changes were comprehensive and immediate. Every employee, from part-time tellers to senior executives, was required to complete 40 hours of implicit bias training within 60 days. New protocols were established specifically for serving underage clients, and most importantly, the bank established a rule that no customer under 18 could be denied service or reported to the authorities without the approval of at least 2 managers and documented evidence of specific policy violations. Leo's ordeal had created a seismic shock, forcing rigid and biased systems to look at themselves and change. The storm had passed, and now it was time to clean up the aftermath. But for the Sterling family, the most important battle was still ahead, the fight to heal a wound and reshape a future. The 20-minute drive home from the juvenile detention center was the longest of both Leo's and Isabella's lives. Leo stared silently out the window, trying to process how his safe, predictable world had suddenly become so complicated and frightening. "Mom," Leo finally said, his voice a mere whisper. "Why did she hate me so much? I'd never even met her. I was polite." Isabella felt her heart clench. She pulled the car over to the side of the road, turning off the engine so she could give her full attention to the most important conversation of her life. "Honey," she said, her voice gentle, "what happened to you today was not your fault. She made assumptions about you based on the color of your skin. And that's called racism. It's ugly, it's wrong, but it exists in this world." "But we have money, Mom," Leo said, confusion and hurt written all over his face. "We have a nice house. I go to a good school. Doesn't that matter?" This was the moment Isabella had been dreading for 13 years. She realized that in her effort to protect her son, she had inadvertently made him more vulnerable to the harshness of reality. "Leo," she said, taking his hand, "I need to tell you something important about our family. We don't just have money. We have a lot of money, more than most people can possibly imagine." Over the next 2 hours, right there in the car parked on the side of the road, Isabella explained everything. About the Montoya Group banking empire founded by his great-grandfather, about the family's $3.5 billion net worth, about the fact that they owned a 55% stake in Meridian Trust Bank itself, and about why she had hidden it all from him. "I wanted you to build your own character first," she explained. "I wanted you to understand the value of kindness and humility before you knew the responsibility that comes with our family's position. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that maybe I left you unprepared for the real world." Leo was quiet for a long time, looking down at their clasped hands. "So we could have stopped what happened today." "Yes," Isabella said firmly, "and we did stop it. But more importantly, we are going to make sure it doesn't happen to other kids who don't have the advantages we do." That conversation marked Leo's transformation. Within a month, the Montoya Family Foundation announced a major initiative: Financial Justice for All. The program was designed to educate young people about their financial rights and provide resources for families facing discrimination. and Leo Sterling became the face of the campaign. He shared his story at schools and community centers across the state. His message was simple but powerful. Every young person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or economic situation. Thousands of young people responded, sharing their own stories. 3 months later, Leo returned to that same branch of Meridian Trust Bank to finally open the bank account he had intended to. This time, he was not a naive 13-year-old boy trying to prove his independence. He was a young man who understood both his privilege and his responsibility, who had learned a bitter lesson about injustice, but had also discovered his own power to fight against it. The staff treated him with the utmost respect and professionalism. A young specialist was assigned to walk him through every step. The entire process, which should have taken 15 minutes the first time, was now completed in under 5. As he held the new savings passbook in his hands, Leo knew this was more than just a personal victory. He had learned that real power isn't in the money you have, but in how you use it to defend those who don't have the same advantages. He had turned a traumatic experience into a legacy of change. And it was the beginning of a much, much longer journey. The story of Leo and Isabella shows us that discrimination, even in its smallest forms, can inflict deep wounds and steal a child's innocence. But it also shows a greater power, the power of love, of truth, and of using one's influence responsibly to create change. They turned a painful experience into a legacy of hope and justice. What do you think of this story? Have you or someone you know ever been unfairly judged just based on appearance? What do you think is the most powerful way to confront injustice? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit the like and share buttons to spread the message of courage and positive change. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next inspiring journey. Thank you for listening. Because sometimes, real power isn't about tearing down what's wrong, but about building up what's right.